They said if you could make it to his cabin before the sun slipped behind the ridge, you would walk back down the mountain healed. Bones straightened, fevers broken, curses lifted like fog from a hollow. Folks crossed counties on bleeding feet to reach him, carrying children who no longer cried, husbands who no longer spoke, hope wrapped in burlap and prayer. His hands smelled of roots and rain, his voice low as creek waters over stone, and sickness obeyed him like a scolded dog. Yet every morning, before the first rooster dared to crow, the healer doubled over alone, coughing his life into the dirt floor, pressing shaking fingers to a chest he could not save. In the heart of Appalachia, where faith and folklore share the same breath, the man who could mend everyone else was slowly dying, and the mountains were running out of time to decide whether that was a curse, a calling, or the cruelest kind of miracle. The morning mist clung to the hollows like moth-eaten lace, threading through the blackjack pines and sourwood trees that stood sentinel over the narrow valley. Silas Dockery watched it from his porch, a tin cup of sassafras tea growing cold in his weathered hands. His fingers, gnarled as old hickory roots, trembled slightly as he raised the cup to his lips. The trembling had started 6 months ago. So subtle at first, he'd convinced himself it was just the mountain cold settling into his bones. But Silas knew better. A man who'd spent 63 years reading the signs in yarrow stems, and the color of a person's tongue couldn't lie to himself forever. The sun was just beginning to pink up the eastern ridge when he heard the first footsteps on the trail. They came every morning now, sometimes before the roosters sang, people climbing the steep path to his cabin with their ailments and their desperate hopes. Today, it was Nell Pruitt, her youngest boy, Samuel, wrapped in a quilt and whimpering against her shoulder. "Mr. Silas," she called out, breathless, from the climb. It's his croup again, been barking like a seal pup all night, and I can hear the wheeze in his chest. Something fierce. Silas set down his cup and rose slowly, steadying himself against the porch post. The vertigo had gotten worse this past week, the world tilting like a skiff on rough water whenever he stood too quick. "Bring him inside, Nell," he said, his voice still strong, despite everything else that was failing. "Let's have a look at the little fellow." The cabin was dim and fragrant with hanging herbs, bundles of mullein, boneset and yellow root, dangled from the rafters like strange stalactites. Jars lined every available shelf, filled with tinctures and salves, roots and barks, each one labeled in Silas's careful script. He'd learned his letters from his grandmother, the same woman who taught him that bloodroot could stop a hemorrhage, and that wild ginger eased a bellyache better than any store-bought remedy. Silas lit a lamp and examined the boy with gentle efficiency. Samuel's lips had a bluish tinge, and his breathing came in harsh, rattling gasps. The child's eyes were wide with fear, which only made the breathing worse. Now, Silas murmured, running his hand over Samuel's forehead. "Ain't nothing here we can't handle. Your mama brought you to the right place." He moved to his workbench, his hands finding the right jars by instinct, even as his vision blurred momentarily at the edges. Lobelia for the lungs, wild cherry bark for the cough, and a touch of catnip to ease the child's fear. He mixed them with honey he'd traded for last fall, stirring the concoction while speaking low words his grandmother had taught him, words older than the mountains themselves. "Give him a spoonful every 2 hours," Silas instructed, handing the jar to Nell. "And tonight, you boil water on the stove, Throw in some of this here pine resin and let him breathe the steam. Keep the room warm and moist. He'll be running through those hills. Again come 3 days. Nell's eyes glistened with gratitude. What do I owe you, Mr. Silas? Your man still got that saw that cuts true? Yes, sir, he does. Then maybe he could spare an afternoon to help me buck up that fallen oak behind the house. Winter's not so far off. He'll be here Saturday, Nell promised. She reached out and squeezed Silas's hand. You're looking peaked yourself, if you don't mind my saying. You taking care of yourself up here? Silas smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. I'm fit as a fiddle, Nell. Just need more sleep is all. These old bones don't rest like they used to. After Nell left, 3 more people came. Jacob Stamper, with the rheumatism that twisted his hands into claws. Silas gave him a salve of wintergreen and pokeroot, taught him exercises to keep the joints limber. Then came Hazel McCoy, bleeding more than she should with her monthly courses. For her, he prepared lady's mantle and shepherd's purse, and told her to rest more, work less, though he knew she wouldn't with 6 children and a farm to run. Last was Thomas Gentry, bringing his daughter Lily, who hadn't spoken a word since witnessing her mother's death in childbirth 3 months prior. This was the hardest kind of healing, the kind that couldn't be solved with roots and herbs alone. Silas sat with the girl for a long while, saying nothing, just letting her be in the quiet of his cabin. He showed her his jars, let her smell the different herbs, gave her a smooth river stone to hold. Sometimes healing wasn't about doing. It was about creating a space where a wounded soul could begin to knit itself back together. Bring her every week, he told Thomas as they left, long as it takes. And Thomas, talk to her about her mama, the good memories. Don't let silence fill up the house. Silence can be a poison all its own. By noon, Silas was alone again. He sat heavily in his rocking chair, the trembling in his hands now accompanied by a deep, gnawing ache in his bones. He'd been ignoring it for months, but it had become impossible to deny. The weight loss, the night sweats, the way his breath sometimes came short, even when he was sitting still. He knew what it meant. He'd seen it before in others. His body was turning against itself, cells gone rogue and multiplying where they shouldn't, a rot spreading from somewhere deep inside. The irony wasn't lost on him. Silas Dockery, who could draw the fever from a dying child, who could knit a broken bone faster than any doctor in 3 counties, who knew the secret of stopping blood with a word and a touch, couldn't heal himself of the sickness that was eating him from within. He'd tried, of course, had taken every remedy he knew for cancer, turkey tail mushroom, bloodroot extract, Essiac tea made from burdock, and sheep sorrel. He'd spoken the old prayers, drawn the protective symbols his grandmother had taught him. Nothing worked. If anything, he was getting worse faster. That afternoon, exhausted, Silas dozed in his chair and dreamed of his grandmother. Granny Dockery had been a legend in these mountains, famous for curing everything from colic to consumption. She'd had the gift, same as him, passed down through the generations like a family Bible. He could see her clearly in his dream, sitting at this very cabin 70 years ago, teaching a young boy which leaves to pick and when, how to listen to the plants, how to hear what a body was saying beneath the words. "Why can't I heal myself, Granny?" he asked in the dream. She looked at him with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Because sometimes the gift don't work that way, boy. Sometimes a healer's power is meant for others. It's the sacrifice we make." "That don't seem fair." Fair's got nothing to do with it. You think the rain falls fair. You think the mountain decides who gets the easy path and who gets the hard climb. You got the gift for a reason, Silas. Now, you got to figure out what to do with the time you got left. He woke with a start, the dream fading, but Granny's words lingering like wood smoke. The sun was lowering toward the western ridge, painting the hollow in shades of amber and gold. Silas rose and walked outside, moving slowly down the worn path to his garden. The garden had always been his pride. Here grew the plants he couldn't find wild. Motherwort from seed, brought over from the old country. St. John's wort, that glowed yellow in the summer sun. Echinacea with its purple crowns. He'd tended this plot for 40 years, ever since he'd come back from the war in Korea, and decided to follow in his grandmother's footsteps. He knelt in the dirt, his knees protesting, and began to pull weeds with trembling fingers. The physical work felt good, grounding. It reminded him that he was still here, still breathing, still part of the cycle of growth and decay that governed all living things. Mr. Silas. He turned to see Rebecca Walsh standing at the edge of the garden, her medical bag in hand. Rebecca was the closest thing to a real doctor Cades Hollow had. She'd gone off to nursing school in Asheville 20 years ago and come back to care for her people, working out of a small clinic in what used to be the general store. "Rebecca," Silas said, pulling himself to his feet with effort. "What brings you up the mountain?" "You do," she said plainly. Rebecca had never been one for dancing around a subject. "Nell Pruitt came by the clinic this morning. Said you looked poorly. I've been hearing the same from others. How long have you been sick, Silas?" He wiped the dirt from his hands, considering lying, then decided against it. Rebecca was too sharp for that. 6 months, give or take, maybe longer. "What are your symptoms?" he told her, leaving nothing out. The tremors, the weight loss, the bone pain, the night sweats. As he spoke, he watched her face, saw the concern deepen in her eyes. "You need to come down to the clinic. Let me examine you properly. We might need to get you to the hospital in Johnson City." "What for?" Silas asked quietly. "So they can tell me what I already know. So they can pump me full of poison that'll make me sicker than I already am, maybe buy me a few more months of misery." "So they can help you," Rebecca insisted. "Modern medicine has come a long way, Silas. People survive cancer now. They live." "Some do," he acknowledged, "and some just die slower and more expensive. Rebecca, I've made my peace with this." "Have you?" she challenged. "Or are you just scared?" The question hit harder than he expected. Was he scared? Yes, of course he was. But it was more than fear. It was a bone-deep understanding that his time was simply coming to an end, as natural as autumn leaves falling from the trees. "I'm tired," he admitted. "Tired in a way that ain't got nothing to do with sleep. And I can't heal myself, Rebecca. Lord knows I've tried. If my own medicine won't work on me, I don't see how anybody else's will." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the hollow. "There's something you should know," she finally said. "People are starting to talk. Not just about you being sick, but about what it means. Some folks, the more superstitious ones, they're wondering if maybe your gift is leaving you, if maybe the healing won't work anymore." Silas felt a cold finger of dread trace down his spine. "That's foolishness." "Is it? I'm just telling you what I've heard. Martha Keene's husband said maybe that's why you can't heal yourself, because the power's gone." "My power works just fine for others," Silas said firmly. It's only myself I can't heal. That's how it's always been with my family. My grandmother couldn't cure her own consumption. Her mother before her couldn't fix her own heart when it gave out. The gift works outward, not inward. Then help me understand, Rebecca said gently. Why does God or nature or whatever you want to call it work that way? Why give someone the power to heal, but not let them use it on themselves? It was the question Silas had been wrestling with for months, through long sleepless nights when the pain was too much to rest. I think, he said slowly, it's because healing ain't meant to be about the healer. It's meant to be about service, about putting others first. The minute a healer starts thinking about saving himself, starts hoarding the gift for his own use, it becomes something else, something selfish. That seems cruel, maybe. Or maybe it's just the way things have to be to keep the gift pure. Rebecca studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Will you at least let me check on you? Not to cure you, if that's not what you want, but to help manage your pain, to make sure you're as comfortable as possible. I'd appreciate that, Silas said. I truly would. They went inside, and Rebecca gave him a thorough examination. She listened to his heart and lungs, checked his lymph nodes, felt his abdomen. When she was done, her expression was grave. I think it's in your liver, Silas. Maybe other places too. Without proper testing, I can't be sure. But based on what I'm seeing, she trailed off. How long? He asked. Months, maybe. Could be a year if you're lucky. Could be less. Silas nodded. It was what he'd suspected. Then I'd best make the most of the time I got. Over the following weeks, Silas continued his work. People came with their ailments, and he treated them as he always had. But word had spread about his condition, and the stream of visitors changed. Some came with their regular complaints, trusting in his skill despite his own sickness. Others came to check on him, bringing food and offers of help. And a few, the ones who put superstition over sense, stopped coming altogether. It was young Matthew Dockery, his cousin's grandson, who asked the question others were thinking. Uncle Silas, the boy said one afternoon as he helped split kindling, if you can heal everyone else, why can't you heal yourself? Seems like if the gift was real, it ought to work on you too. Silas set down his axe, breathing hard. Even small tasks tired him now. Come sit with me a minute, Matthew. Let me tell you a story. They sat on the porch steps, and Silas began. My grandmother told me once about a spring way back in the deep woods, up on Raven's Peak. She said the water from that spring could heal any sickness, cure any wound. But the spring had a guardian, an old woman who lived in a cave nearby. The guardian could never drink from the spring herself. That was the price she paid for protecting it. Why not? Matthew asked. Because if the guardian drank from the spring, she'd become like everyone else. She'd stop being able to tell who truly needed the healing water and who just wanted it out of greed or vanity. Her sacrifice, going without, was what kept the spring pure. You understand? Matthew frowned, thinking. So you're saying your sickness keeps you honest? In a way. It keeps me humble, reminds me that I'm human, same as everyone who comes to my door. I ain't special, Matthew. I'm just a man who was given a gift and a responsibility. The gift is to heal. The responsibility is to never forget that I'm mortal too. But you could help so many more people if you weren't sick. Maybe, Silas acknowledged, or maybe my sickness is teaching me something I need to know. Maybe it's teaching others something too. As summer deepened into fall, Silas's condition worsened. The trembling became constant, and the pain in his bones grew sharper. Some days he could barely rise from bed. But still they came, the people of Cades Hollow and the neighboring valleys, seeking his help. He treated Eliza Bowen's infant for thrush, using golden seal and gentle prayers. He helped old Samuel Cross with his prostate troubles, brewing him a tea of nettle and saw palmetto. When Lucy Hensley's teenage daughter started having seizures, he prepared a tincture of skullcap and valerian and sat with the family through 3 long nights until the fits subsided. Rebecca came weekly now, bringing morphine for the worst of his pain. They'd developed an odd friendship, the traditional healer and the modern nurse, finding respect for each other's methods despite their differences. "You're stubborn as a mule," she told him one October afternoon, after helping him back to bed following a dizzy spell. "Takes one to know one," he replied with a weak grin. "I'm serious, Silas. You should be in hospice. You should be resting, not seeing patients every day." "And what would they do?" he asked. "There's no other healer within 50 miles. Rebecca, you do good work. But there's some things modern medicine don't handle well. Some things that need the old ways." "I know," she admitted. "I've seen your results. I've seen children who should have died walk out of here healthy. I've seen infections clear up in days when antibiotics failed. I just wish you'd let someone take care of you the way you take care of others." "You are taking care of me," Silas said, "and I'm grateful, but my work ain't done yet." "What work, Silas? You can barely stand." He looked at her steadily. "The work of showing people that healing ain't about perfection. It's about showing up, doing what you can, even when your own body's failing, maybe especially then." In late October, on a morning when the frost painted the hollow white and the maples blazed red and gold against the sky, young Lily Gentry spoke her first words since her mother's death. She and her father had been coming every week, sitting quietly in Silas's cabin, and on this particular morning, while Silas was showing her how to grind herbs with a mortar and pestle, she looked up at him and said, "Can I help?" Thomas Gentry wept openly, and even Silas felt tears on his weathered cheeks. It was these moments, he thought, that made everything worthwhile. The gift had been given to him not for his own benefit, but for moments like these. But his body was failing faster now. By November, he could no longer tend his garden. Matthew came daily to help with chores, to split wood and haul water. Rebecca visited every other day, adjusting his morphine, checking his vital signs, watching him waste away despite her training and his herbs. One cold evening, as the first snow began to fall, Silas asked Matthew to help him outside. He wanted to see the hollow one more time, wanted to feel the snow on his face. They sat on the porch, wrapped in quilts, watching the white flakes drift down through the darkness. Matthew was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "I want to learn," he said suddenly. "The healing, the old ways. Will you teach me?" Silas turned to look at the young man, seeing the earnestness in his face. "You got the gift?" "I don't know. How do you tell?" "Usually it shows itself young. You ever know things you shouldn't know? Ever touch someone who was hurting and felt their pain like it was yours?" Matthew thought for a moment. "Sometimes. When Mama had her migraines, I could feel them in my own head, and I always know when the weather's going to turn, can feel it in my bones." Silas nodded slowly. "That's a start. But having the sensitivity ain't the same as having the gift. The gift requires sacrifice, Matthew. You see what it's cost me." "I see what you've given people," Matthew countered. I see Samuel Pruitt breathing easy. I see Lily Gentry talking again. I see all the folks who climb this mountain sick and go back down healed. That seems worth it to me. Even knowing you can't heal yourself, even knowing you might die of something you could cure in others. Yes, Matthew said without hesitation, because somebody's got to carry it on. The hollow needs a healer. Silas was quiet for a long time, emotion thick in his throat. Then we'd best get started. I ain't got much time left to teach you. Through November and into December, despite his worsening condition, Silas taught Matthew everything he could. They went through every jar and bundle in the cabin, Silas explaining the properties and uses of each plant. He taught Matthew the prayers and words, the timing of harvest, the way to listen to what a body was telling you beneath its symptoms. Healing ain't just about knowing which herb to use, Silas explained one afternoon, his voice weak but steady. It's about seeing the whole person, their life, their fears, their burdens. Sometimes the sickness in the body is just a symptom of a sickness in the spirit. You got to treat both. Matthew absorbed it all like parched earth soaking up rain. He had the gift, Silas could see that now. It showed in the way plants responded to his touch, in the way patients relaxed in his presence. The boy had the sensitivity and the heart for the work. On Christmas Eve, Silas woke to find a line of people waiting outside his cabin despite the snow. They'd come bearing gifts, food, firewood, blankets, carved figures, jars of preserves. They came not seeking healing, but offering thanks, wanting to show this man who'd given so much to them that he was loved and valued. Nell Pruitt brought Samuel, healthy and strong now. Thomas Gentry brought Lily, who read Silas a poem she'd written. Jacob Stamper, his hands still gnarled but working again, brought a rocking chair he'd made. One by one they came, filling the cabin with warmth and gratitude. Silas sat in his bed, too weak to rise, and watched them with tears streaming down his face. This, he thought, was the real gift. Not the healing itself, but the connections it forged, the love it generated, the way it wove a community together in mutual care. That night, after everyone had gone, and Matthew had bedded down by the fire to keep watch, Silas lay awake thinking. He'd made his peace with dying, had known for months it was coming, but he'd wondered in the dark hours if his life had meant anything, if the gift had been worth the cost. Now he knew. Every child he'd healed, every pain he'd eased, every fear he'd calmed, it had all mattered. His inability to heal himself hadn't diminished the gift. If anything, it had refined it, kept it pure, ensured that he never forgot why he did this work. He thought of his grandmother's words in that long-ago dream. You got the gift for a reason, Silas. The reason, he understood now, wasn't just to heal bodies. It was to show people that brokenness and power could exist in the same person, that you could be weak and strong simultaneously, that serving others, even when you couldn't save yourself, was perhaps the highest calling there was. As January arrived with bitter cold and deep snows, Silas grew weaker still. He could no longer see patients, could barely leave his bed. But Matthew was there, learning and practicing under his guidance, beginning to take over the work. You're doing good, Silas told him one afternoon, after Matthew had successfully treated a child's ear infection. Real good. You got a gentler touch than I ever did. I'm scared I'll make a mistake, Matthew admitted, that I'll give someone the wrong thing or miss something important. You will make mistakes, Silas said. I did. Plenty of them. The important thing is to learn from them, to stay humble, to never stop studying and listening. And Matthew, when your time comes, when your own body starts failing, don't fight it. Accept it. It's part of the gift. On a cold morning in later January, with fresh snow covering the hollow like a clean white quilt, Silas Dockery died. Matthew was with him, holding his hand. Rebecca was there too, having climbed up through the snow the night before, when she sensed the end was near. "Thank you," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible. "For all of it?" "For what?" Rebecca asked, leaning close. "For letting me serve, for giving me purpose. For all the years of healing, even the sickness, especially the sickness, it taught me what I needed to know." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes and took one final breath. And then he was gone. The funeral was the largest Cades Hollow had ever seen. People came from every valley and hollow for miles around, filling the little Baptist church to overflowing. They told stories of healings, of lives saved, of the gentle man who'd given everything to help others. Matthew stood and spoke, his voice steady despite his grief. "Uncle Silas used to tell me that a healer's power was meant for others, not themselves. I didn't understand it then. I thought it was unfair, even cruel. But I understand now. His sickness didn't make him less of a healer. It made him more of one. It kept him humble and honest. It taught all of us that you don't have to be perfect to help others. You don't have to be whole to make others whole. You just have to show up, do the work, and trust in the gift." They buried Silas on the ridge above his cabin, where he could look down over the hollow he'd served for so many years. On his gravestone, they carved simple words: "Silas Dockery, healer. He gave what he could not keep to gain what he could not lose." Matthew took over the cabin and the practice, continuing the work his uncle had begun. He tended the garden, mixed the remedies, spoke the old prayers. And when people asked him why Silas hadn't been able to heal himself, Matthew told them the truth as he'd come to understand it. "The gift of healing ain't about power," he'd say. "It's about service." Uncle Silas knew that. He knew that his sickness was part of his calling, not separate from it. It kept him connected to the people he served, reminded him that we're all vulnerable, all mortal, all in need of grace. He couldn't heal himself because that was the price he paid for healing others. And he paid it gladly, right up to the end. Years later, when Matthew's own hands began to tremble and he felt the first signs of his own mortality approaching, he understood even more deeply what Silas had meant. The gift was never meant to save the healer. It was meant to flow through the healer to others, like water through a stream. The stream might eventually run dry, but while it flowed, it gave life to everything it touched. That was the true healing, he realized. Not the remedies or the prayers or the laying on of hands, important as those were. The true healing was in the showing up, the caring, the willingness to serve others even when your own body was breaking down. It was in the message that every life had value, every suffering mattered, every person deserved dignity and care. Silas Dockery had lived that message until his last breath, and in dying, unable to heal himself, he taught a final lesson about what it meant to be a healer, a lesson that echoed through Cades Hollow for generations to come, that the greatest gift we can give is not the one that saves us, but the one that saves others, even at the cost of ourselves. The mountains remembered him, the people remembered him, and somewhere in the mist-wrapped hollows, where the old ways still held power and the herbs still grew wild and strong, His spirit lingered, watching over those who continued the ancient work of healing, even when they could not heal themselves.